Okay, welcome everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. I think everybody can see my screen. So I'll go ahead and introduce myself. I've met some of you before, but I'm Matthew McFall, a Senior Private Sector Advisor at UNDP with the Food and Agricultural Commodity Systems team. I'll let my colleagues introduce themselves. Let's start with Christina.
Thank you, Matthew. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Christina Archer. I work with Matthew in UNDP's Food, Agriculture, Commodity Systems team as a Senior Private Sector Advisor. I'll pass it over to my colleague, Greta.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Greta Ellero. I work in the same team together with Matthew and Christina, and I'm a Program Coordination Associate Officer. I will pass to Lara.
Thank you, Greta. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lara Jacob. I work for UNEP's Climate Finance team, and I lead their work on capacity building and finance sector engagement. Who's left? Greta?
I think we're Alex. I don't know if you want to introduce yourself, but
yes. Pass it over to Alex.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alexandra, and I'm here supporting the team as part of the Food and Agricultural Commodity Systems community.
Great. Thanks, everybody. As Alex mentioned, this workshop is organized through the FACS community. We are recording, which we can share later for those interested. Spanish interpretation is also available, which you can access through Zoom. And for anybody who only speaks Spanish, if you could please let us know in the chat box. This will be important later for breakout groups. So please, if you speak only Spanish or prefer Spanish, please note that in the chat box. So on the screen is today's objectives of this two-day workshop. We will be introducing the Value Beyond Value Chain toolkit and framework, which provides a practical guidance for companies and financial institutions to work with governments at both national and subnational levels to influence the enabling environment for sustainable agricultural production. We'll be discussing how public-private collaboration can drive more sustainable agricultural production, and through some interactive polling questions, group discussions in breakouts, and some examples from participants. We will hope you will get inspired by some of the ideas around effective public-private collaboration. And
Matthew, you are muted.
oh, apologies. Was I muted? I was muted the whole time, sorry. Okay, I was just running through today's objectives, which you can see on the screen. So we'll be introducing the Value Beyond Value Chains toolkit, providing a conceptual framework and practical guidance for companies and FIs to work with governments. And then we'll also look at how public-private collaboration can drive more sustainable agriculture. And we'll have a series of interactive polling questions, group discussions, and case studies. We have today's agenda. I see a hand raised. Today's agenda, so we'll go through brief introductions as we're doing now, and then we will have a short poll as well. And then we'll go through the presentation of the Value Beyond Value Chains initiative and the guidance, followed by some breakout groups. And then we'll have a short break, and our colleague from the Tropical Forest Alliance will provide a brief overview of some of the reasons why companies are engaging in landscape and jurisdictional initiatives outside their value chains, followed by some individual reflection in plenary. And then tomorrow we will have a second day, which we'll talk about later. So we are organizing these workshops as part of training activities under the Food Systems Land Use and Restoration Impact Program, the FOLR program. The workshops are most relevant to those engaged in this program across the 27 country projects under the program, which is funded by the Global Environment Facility and led by the World Bank. So companies, country project teams, and any other stakeholders who are participating today to learn more about potential partnerships and collaboration opportunities under the Fuller program. And it's also being offered by, as I mentioned, the FACS community. So the material is beneficial to those who may be outside of the Fuller program, but who have joined through the community and wish to learn more. So please do stay in touch with the FACS community so you can stay up to date with any of the latest events and knowledge sharing with other practitioners. So you can see the website there. So if you're more interested in learning more about Fuller, please do take a look. And I think Greta is going to share a brief Mentimeter poll to get us started.
Thank you, Matthew. Yes, as mentioned, I would like to invite you to, I will share my screen and I will invite you to go to mentimeter.com. I will leave you some time to go to www.mentimeter.com. You can go either using your computer or your phone, and you should enter this code 41525299. Or you can also use the QR code on the left, on the right, sorry.
Greta, could you please share your screen?
Oh yeah, sorry, I thought I did already. Thank you for, can you see? Great. So I leave you some time to join the pool. I can see already someone has joined. Alexandra, if you can also copy in the chat the link and the code. So we are starting in few seconds with the first question. It's meant to know a little bit more about you. So the first question is, which is the country where you work? Let us see. I personally live in Italy. I'm home-based. So let's see, we have people from Ecuador, Switzerland, Brazil, Kenya, Vietnam, France, Arab states, Paraguay, Costa Rica, Indonesia, Germany, Uganda, Canada. We have quite a broad representation from the different continents, I would say. Ethiopia, Ecuador, Benin. Wonderful. We got 25 responses. Thank you very much. So now
for those joining in the Asia Pacific time zone, we know it's very late for you.
Yes, exactly. So thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. So the second question is, we would like to know in which sector do you work? So we have from the private sector, which also includes the financial institutions, international organizations, NGOs, other. Anyone from the public sector? Yes, we have a representative from the public sector. Wonderful. So we have a majority of people from the international organizations. Thank you very much. And now the last question. What do you expect and want to learn from these virtual trainings? As Matthew was mentioning, This is a 2 days virtual training, so it would be great if you are able to attend both days. So let's see, what are your expectations? Tips to engage further my company on landscape initiatives and external fundings to fund agricultural transition. That will be covered. Exit strategy of food systems. How private companies can engage with government. Lessons from multiple countries on engagement between different stakeholders, including companies. Get tools to engage effectively with private sector and governments. Real cooperation between public and private sector international organizations, effective private sector engagement, tools for collaboration, experience about new ways to structure a value chain in agribusiness, policy recommendations for landscape governance, new skills, and meet other colleagues, specific benefits of public-private partnerships. Great. Learn about successful experiences in working with private sector in national and subnational level. Collaboration, work, systems, food. Wonderful. Thank you very much. Please keep answering to this question. We will definitely take into consideration your desires, your expectations, so that we can provide the most useful training to you. And I would like to remind you to don't hesitate to put questions, feedbacks in the chat for us to answer, or if you want also to discuss later, we will have definitely the chance during these 2 hours together. Thank you. And now I will pass the floor back to you, Matthew.
Thanks, Greta. Let me share my screen. Okay. So why do we need transformation in commodities production? As we all know, unsustainable agricultural commodity production is creating major risks, both environmental and social, which threaten food production globally, especially in the tropical producing landscapes and supply chains where these key commodities are concentrated. So I'll highlight just a few statistics, which I'm sure many of you are aware, but I think they're important to reiterate. Agriculture and food systems account for 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions. It's estimated that it drives around 80% of native habitat loss, and is a primary threat to 86% of 28,000 at-risk species. There's issues around pollution, overuse of chemical fertilizers and pesticides, freshwater scarcity challenges, water stress. Agriculture accounts for 70% of global freshwater withdrawals, and land degradation is another challenge. Of course, deforestation, which is the focus of much of the work on the Green Commodities Program and the FACS team. Just 7 key agricultural commodities: cattle, palm oil, soy, cocoa, rubber, coffee, and timber accounted for 26% of global tree cover loss, up from 2000 to 2015. And there's other challenges around producer poverty and human rights issues related to child labor. Yeah, so clearly there are a number of different challenges that we need to address. But overcoming these challenges offers huge rewards. So transforming tropical commodity production in landscapes and supply chains can ensure future productivity and security, improve livelihoods, and protect crucial ecosystems and natural resources. So some of the different rewards include mitigation, climate change mitigation through carbon sequestration, adaptation, the role of forests play in as a food safety net for local and indigenous communities during climate shocks, which can reduce risks from disasters like flooding and help regulate water systems and microclimates. Looking at biodiversity conservation, since over 80% of the world's terrestrial biodiversity can be found in forests, preventing deforestation can ensure the survival of many species and their ability to provide ecosystem services. Restoring land and regenerating land could generate $85 billion in net benefits, provide 30 to 40 billion each year in extra income for smallholders, improve food security, and then socioeconomic benefits. There's business opportunities, things like organic farming, and then obviously transformation of the commodity sector can help achieve many of the sustainable development goals. So I think this is information that many people are aware, but it's something to keep in mind as context for what we're working on. So why should companies and financial institutions engage beyond their value chains? So for companies and financial institutions, inaction carries both short-term and long-term risks. Rapid action to address sustainable production can protect revenue and reputation while ensuring a stable operating environment. So brand and reputation risks include, the campaigns which are targeting retailers, manufacturers, traders, producers, and financiers and investors of companies who are producing these commodities. Reputation related to deforestation and the negative environmental impacts, poor labor issues, and the human rights issues that we've discussed previously. There's also issues around risks related to license to operate. So things like the EU DR regulation coming up. Markets and trade blocs are building tougher legislation and regulations for commodity imports. So we're already seeing this concern and challenges related to EUDR that the private sector is voicing, as well as the potential impacts for smallholders in these supply chains, and then of course supply chain disruptions. So trading bans, crop failures, things like obviously COVID, the pandemic, can disrupt sourcing and cause ripple effects and business impacts across the entire supply chain. There are also systemic risks that are related to, a lack of action on the part of companies. So as we mentioned, obviously the climate issues, ecological instability, so commodity-driven deforestation and unsustainable farming practices, destroying ecosystem services and natural capital that societies and economies depend on. And then obviously livelihood damage and food insecurity. So crop failures and declining productivity threaten the livelihoods of producers, particularly smallholders and marginalized groups. And so these are systemic issues that need to be addressed. So commodities supply chains are extremely large and complicated. Multiple factors interact to create perverse incentives for unsustainable production. And these barriers are challenging for individual companies alone or financial institutions to address. Some of the drivers are listed here. I won't go through all of them, but I think that issues around the illegality, uncertified, unverified, and illegal products are still getting into the supply chain through illegal and corrupt means. There's low market penetration for sustainable commodities, and so there are plenty of remaining markets for unsustainably produced commodities, which we'll get to a bit later, looking at raising the floor. There's many investors and traders prioritizing short-term return on investment above long-term sustainability resilience. So my colleague Laura will get into the financial institution elements later on. And Greta, do we have a Mentimeter poll ready for this one? Okay. So I want, keeping in mind some of these different drivers, we have a poll that can that Greta's going to put up now.
Thank you, Matthew. If you can stop sharing your screen so that I can share mine. Thank you. So we would like to ask you to kindly join again Mentimeter. I hope you can see the code above. If not, my colleague Alexandra kindly or Philip can kindly put it in the chat again. And as soon as you are able to join Mentimeter again, we would like to kindly ask you to rank the following drivers of unsustainable agriculture production based on your experience. I will briefly read them as they are a little bit small. So the first one is differing legal and policy environment, incentivization of unsustainable production practices, such as subsidies, prioritizing short-term return over long-term investment in sustainability, traceability is difficult and costly, illegality and corruption, technical training to farmers on sustainable practices is costly, limited business case for sustainability, customers not prepared to pay a premium for sustainability, and the last one is and the last one is now gone, as some of you already are answering. So I leave you a few seconds to rank these drivers based also on what Matthew has just answered. So the first at the moment is prioritizing short-term return over long-term investment in sustainability. And there is a large market for unsustainability produced commodities. As well as incentivization of unsustainable production practices, such as subsidies. These are, at the moment, the top three. Wonderful. So it seems that markets, there is still a large market for unsustainability produced commodities. Thank you very much for your answers. And I leave the floor back to you, Matthew.
Thank you, Greta, and thanks everybody for answering. Very interesting results. I see also the prioritizing of short term over the long term, quite the theme everyone's highlighted as well. Okay, if my screen is there. So, as we know, global supply chains are complex. They're really a global supply system with complex underlying drivers related to policy, financing, and market demand, posing major challenges for companies and FIs seeking to improve commodity sustainability in their value chain. So, transforming the commodity sector clearly requires collaboration and coordinated action to address these barriers, and engaging what we call beyond your value chain offers a key opportunity for companies and institutions to help accelerate this transformation. So over the past, let's say 10 to 15 years, there's been much progress amongst, large agricultural producers, buyers, companies, and financial institutions on making sustainability commitments. So I think it's important to recognize that we are in a much better place than we were, 15 years ago when it comes to sustainability on these issues. So there have been the creation of global frameworks like the New York Declaration on Forests, sectoral sustainability standards like RSPO or RTRS, and then common frameworks for action like the Accountability Framework and other global reporting initiatives. So those are positive steps. Companies have improved supply chain management through implementing sustainable sourcing policies, mapping supply chains and improving traceability, implementing certification systems, and making longer-term purchasing commitments from suppliers. So these are also good steps. And then there has also been an increase in support to farmers through farmer training, access to finance, replanting, and certification. So while much progress has been made, and these are all important efforts that signify major progress has been made on these issues, most companies still, with few exceptions, do not have a clear understanding of how they can collaborate better with governments to improve the enabling policy environment for production. So this is even more true for smaller companies and for those who are early on in their sustainability journeys. And tomorrow we will get into some of the different ways that companies of different sizes and different, let's say, sustainability maturity levels can still engage with governments in multi-stakeholder platforms to collaborate to improve the policy environment. And later, we will also hear from our colleague Leonie from the Tropical Forest Alliance about how and why companies are increasingly engaging outside their value chains through jurisdictional and landscape initiatives. What value does engaging beyond our value chains create? So as I mentioned, many large brands and agribusinesses, retailers, etc., have made a range of commitments on sustainable sourcing. But while some have invested significantly to address critical sourcing risks that we mentioned previously within their supply chains, many companies still have a long way to go. There are also large and important demand markets with low awareness and low demand for sustainably produced commodities. Highlighted by the Mentimeter that we just did, clearly many of the participants agree that there's still too large a market for unsustainably produced commodities. So as a result of this, while some companies have managed to significantly improve the performance of their supply chains, a two-tier system has been created where there are islands of good practice, while a good business as usual approach continues for the rest. So this leaves those companies who are at the forefront of improving their sustainability performance at a commercial disadvantage. And there is an increasing recognition that addressing issues in supply chains is necessary but insufficient for building a sustainable agricultural system, which requires the transformation of entire sectors and not just the individual supply chains and farms. So many leading companies are therefore increasingly seeking to engage with approaches that can strengthen the enabling conditions for sustainable production. So through multi-stakeholder approaches at the landscape, subnational, and national levels, these can create a more level playing field for all companies, which is really the ultimate goal, I think, in improving the sector and the landscape or jurisdiction in which the commodities are grown. So collaborating to lift the floor, as the previous slide noted, supports some of the long-term and short-term priorities related to sustained growth, supply chain resilience, risk mitigation, improving a business reputation, and market demand. So as well as reducing operational and systemic risks, engaging beyond value chains can increase access to finance, reduce costs, and as I mentioned, improve reputation. Another slide highlighting some of these in more detail. I won't get into this too much. Greta, we have another Mentimeter, yes? So I think in the context of these couple slides and the one around the two-tiered and what is needed raising across the board, Greta is going to introduce another Mentimeter poll. Go ahead. I need to stop.
Thank you. Thank you, Matthew. I will share one more time my screen. I put in the chat the link to Mentimeter and the code. We would like to hear from you one last time, your perspective on what is needed to further encourage companies and governments to collaborate and to lift the floor, as Matthew explained just now. So if you can write a few words providing your perspective. You can also write in Spanish, or if it's easier for you. More financing and more learning, robust policies, business or financial business case. Stronger regulations aligned with climate change and biodiversity global agreements, create non-bureaucratic regulations, policy directives linked to incentives, targeted learning and business cases, financing for collaborative processes, flexibility of policies and incentives, for the formalization and technicification. Clear incentives and value propositions for both companies and governments, more efficient channels to cooperate, governments to set minimum command and control systems, companies to set transparent policy engagement strategies, support for dispersion of traceability costs, best practices, business case, establish sustainability pacts or agreements. Governments need to reach out to farmers or support companies which reach out to farmers and try to raise production standards. More guidance on funding available, including the UDR. Develop a framework for connecting the investments with results in terms of improvements regarding climate, deforestation, human rights, etc. Farmers' incentives, de-risking with public funds. Again, it mentioned subsidies that are more ecologically and socially sustainable. Clear communication and understanding of the benefits, investigative journalism and government action against bad actors, specific multi-sectorial coordinations led by the private sector, reaching cost winners and losers with visibility, enabling policy financing and incentives, control and systems. Great, thank you very, very much for all these responses. So with that, that was the last Mentimeter poll. Later on, we will be using a Google Doc. I will share again the link to the Google Doc in the chat. And now I leave the floor back to you.
Thank you, Greta. And now I'm going to pass on to my colleague Lara to present some specific information on value beyond value chains for financial institutions.
Thank you, Matthew. Yes, so Matthew has already done quite a brilliant job in the previous slide, sort of outlining some of the drivers of unsustainable land use and how that can kind of have an impact on the bottom line for a corporate, and consequently the importance of then engaging beyond your value chain to address some of these risks. And as you mentioned, many of these drivers, I should say, also apply to financial institutions. And over the next few slides, I'm going to dig a bit deeper as to what that actually means from this finance sector perspective. So for financial institutions engaging beyond their value chains, this is critical because deforestation risk and unsustainable land use is increasingly becoming a material issue. So Matthew sort of already outlined the changing regulatory environment, the kind of operational environment that some of these companies face. But materiality for a finance sector means that exposure to risk can have an impact on the financial institution, both directly, so through reputational risk issues or brand management, and indirectly through its business relationships. So through the creditworthiness of a client, for example, and then ultimately that's going to have an impact on the bottom line of a financial institution. Next slide, please. Can you skip over that slide, please, Matthew? Can you skip? Oh, thank you. So in terms of how financial institutions internalize the risk, it's manifested in a number of ways. I've previously mentioned reputation or brand. They can also impact a company's ESG performance. We have numerous NGO campaigns, for example, such as BankTrack in the Netherlands. Consequently, this can have an impact on a company's license to operate, and then therefore confers the risk to a financial institution. So again, through these indirect business relationships, we've got the risk transferred to a financial entity. Next slide, please, Matthew. Other types of risks include these systemic risks. We've already looked at how climate change or climate impacts can affect the viability of a business. We sort of see that these sort of systemic risks, such as ecological sustainability and all of the forthcoming regulation to help mitigate some of this instability, can lead to a devaluation of a company. So if a company is not responding or meeting its climate change target obligations, this can sort of lead to an asset becoming devalued or stranded. And ultimately, this is going to impact the portfolio of the bank or the investor. So this is sort of what we mean by stranded assets. Next slide, please, Matthew. This slide, I think, does a really great job of summarizing how deforestation risk and more generally unsustainable land use can impact financial institutions. So we see companies representing different aspects of their value chain and how they can encounter risk. So we've got, producers, traders, processors, and retailers, and ultimately the consumer. The sort of risks are manifested in a number of ways throughout the supply chain, be it operational, legal, or reputational. And consequently, this in turn is manifested as risk to financial institutions through credit defaults or non-performing loans, the depreciation of assets, based on the changing regulatory environment that I've just mentioned, and then also revenues and overall profitability might be impacted if markets change over time. So I think we can move on to the next slide. So what does this mean for financial institutions? Again, similar to corporates, for financial institutions to engage with or beyond their value chain means looking at beyond the usual suspects. In this case, we mean a deeper engage with clients, government stakeholders, NGOs, multilateral institutions. So how does that manifest itself in practice? Because not all these stakeholders are necessarily going to be relevant for your kind of value beyond value engagement. And a lot of it is sort of hinged or anchored on your own business strategy or your own corporate priorities as a financial entity. And so I would say the engagement depends on what the financial institution aims to achieve and the governance level. So, some of these questions, some of the questions that you can pose to yourself when trying to sort of determine, how should I engage beyond my value chain? What does it look like? Are sort of anchored in quite basic risk management approaches. So, what sectors am I exposed to? What is the geographical exposure of my portfolio? What are the priorities of my various stakeholders and priorities of the different organizations? And so this will help enable a sort of baseline or sort of stock taking of where you are at currently and where you hope to be, and identify the stakeholders that you should be engaging with to sort of take you on this journey. Next slide, please. So one of the ways that financial institutions can engage beyond their value chains is through government engagement, much like we've identified for the corporate sector. This can take the form of national government engagement through finance sector roundtables, commodity forums, and other industry associations. Ultimately, national level engagement is about, as Matthew mentioned previously, it's about lifting the floor, developing a kind of common understanding around norms and standards that can be applicable to the entire sector. And the intent is to create a kind of level playing field among institutions. Next slide, please. So the benefit of this type of engagement is that it's largely pre-competitive, and it has the added benefit of sharing the risks and costs of engagement among financial institutions. So it helps sort of alleviate some of the first mover risk associated with individual engagements. So finally, the other form of government engagement we can consider is engagement at the jurisdictional or subnational level. Often this comes in the form of providing technical assistance and capital, not necessarily bilaterally or directly, but oftentimes in partnership with a number of other stakeholders. So again, this sort of goes back to these kind of base questions that you can start considering when mapping out the list of stakeholders to engage. One example of this is sort of the blended finance modalities that we will start discussing in tomorrow's session. This type of engagement between the public and private sector and potentially technical institutions such as NGOs can help create needed financial and fiscal incentives to producers who need support to make the transition to sustainable practices. So ultimately, this is not a one-size-fits-all. There isn't necessarily a blueprint for how you should go about it, but engagement at the jurisdictional and subnational level very much hinges on understanding your context and identifying these sort of individualized needs. And then working very closely with government stakeholders and others to start creating some of these solutions. Next slide, please. So tomorrow we're going to be exploring a bit more in depth what we mean by practical actions to engagement and the provision of support. So, essentially we're going to be discussing blended finance modalities tomorrow. But, today, I think looking at or unpacking these kind of multi-stakeholder initiatives as a necessary precondition or first step to a more practical engagement or business-oriented engagement. And then secondly, engaging with NGOs and other expert groups to provide technical assistance are two necessary first steps to enable the third step, which is developing products and services to assist companies in their transition to sustainable land use. Next slide, please, Matthew. I think we can skip that slide.
Laura, that's the last slide I have.
Oh, that's the last slide. Yes. Okay. Well, great. I think, I think the sort of more specific aspects of finance sector engagement will be addressed during tomorrow's session. So I urge you all to stay tuned. Back to you, Matthew.
Thank you. Thanks, Laura. Great insights. I think we're going into breakout groups next. I don't know, Greta, if you wanted to introduce that.
Sure, thank you, Matthew. And yes, we will be discussing what is your experience with public-private collaboration for sustainable agriculture. I put the question in the chat, also translation in Spanish. You will be put in breakout groups, so you can learn more from each other. So yes, if everything is ready, Philippe, we can open the breakout.
Sure thing, everything is ready, and we shall reconvene in 15 minutes.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. See you in 15 minutes.
All right, team. I left you out of the breakouts in case you want to breathe a little. If you feel like joining the conversations, do let me know. I think you're able to do it as co-host as well, but I can definitely put you in breakouts.
Welcome back, everyone. I'll give it a few more seconds while we make sure everyone is still here. Thanks to everybody who participated. I'll just open the floor for a few minutes here to let anybody reflect in the plenary on their conversations, any topics, questions of interest. The floor is open.
No, if I may, hi everyone. Jad speaking from Danone Company. I don't know if you know us. We are selling dairy products globally. I'm in charge of the global forest policy for the group, so all the deforestation and conversion of natural ecosystem commitments we have. So working a lot on many commodities. All the ones that you've been flagging, Matthew, actually. So good to see that I'm in the topic. So we've been discussing with two colleagues that were more from the public sector. Very interesting to have their insights, as I'm so from WFP and from UNDP, not necessarily organization with whom I'm working personally. So I think on my side, what is interesting to see is that from this company, this type of organization, there is a big expertise on the field, on how to develop programs, on how to run them. But from the private sector topic, and I'm speaking because I'm trying to structure all this approach of landscape. Internally, sometimes we are lacking this expertise. And one of the first big steps for us is really to first trace our commodities, have a better understanding of our current supply chain before upskilling on all this topic of landscape. So I think there is a big work to be done collectively on how we can also share best practices, upskill our companies also internally to push the topic, and reinforce the collaborations to have a project on the ground that are relevant both for us as private organization, but also for public experts on the ground. So it's a first thought, but for us it's really step by step, clean supply chain internally, and then go to beyond our supply chain, and for that we need expertise on the ground and help on finding the fundings and developing the capacities on the ground. Hope this helps to kick off the discussion.
Great, thanks, Jay.
I could go next. I had a great chat with a lady from PNUD, a UNDP in Peru, where already they are doing some really interesting work with private sector on sustainable production landscapes. And the thought following the presentations from you, Matthew, and Lara, on what next, how can we work more with local government, because Peru is quite decentralized, was very interesting. Lady, you had some really good insights to share. Lady, ¿querías compartir un poquito de lo que hemos hablado en nuestro grupo? ¿Sí estás ahí todavía? Puedes hablar en español, claro.
¿Cómo están? Sí, ¿qué tal? Buenos días a todos y todas. Sí, justo conversábamos sobre este desafío que tenemos de llevar toda esta transición de los sistemas productivos en escenarios normales a sistemas productivos sostenibles, bajo en emisiones, ¿no? Y cómo el Estado, en nuestro caso a nivel de los gobiernos subnacionales, es importante que compren también este planteamiento, ¿no? Porque, por ejemplo, en el caso peruano hay muchos proyectos de inversión pública que tienen un enfoque de repente en modelos convencionales. Entonces, si es que no logramos que ellos también alineen estos enfoques en el territorio, estamos dejando un actor de lado y sobre todo un actor importante que viene a atender necesidades incluso más allá de lo productivo, ¿no? Y en
Lady,
este
voy a traducir un poquito. Si prefieres seguir hablando en español, yo puedo hacer la traducción, pero si puedes hablar en inglés también sería lo que sería mejor para ti. So what Lady was sharing is that, you know, as I sort of mentioned before, they are working at a sort of a landscape territory level, and it is really important now to engage a bit more with local government, especially. And she also mentioned in the particular landscape that she's been focusing on, governments have a lot of resources to invest. So how do we engage with them more to invest those more in a more coordinated way? Si quieres seguir, Lady, pero poquito y poquito, si quieres que sigo traduciendo, si lo puedes hacer un poquito.
Sí, y por otro lado también cómo es importante tomar en consideración las prioridades desde los productores, ¿no? Estamos en una zona donde priorizan la salud y los servicios básicos, no tienen acceso a agua, luz, por ejemplo, y luego
also,
vienen las actividades productivas.
Really important, they've been focusing on the productive aspect, so how to make production systems more sustainable, but let's not forget that we also need to be taking into account the perspectives of the producers themselves. So Lady shared that in the area where they are working, a recent engagement with the producers showed that their number one priority was access to health and basic services such as water, which they didn't have. So yeah, I think it's just for me, it was a really good to hear from her, really good reminder that, you know, we need to make sure there's visibility and voice given to the producers in public-private collaboration spaces, because that input will help shape what some of that public-private collaboration can look like.
Great, thanks, Christina, and to Lady and Jade for contributions. I think we're going to move to our colleague Leonie from the Tropical Forest Alliance, who is going to talk about a recent study they've released and why companies are increasingly engaging beyond their value chains. So over to Leonie. I will share my screen and do the slides.
Great. Thanks a lot, Matthew. Hi, everyone. Thanks to Matthew and other colleagues from UNDP, Greta, etc., for giving us the opportunity to present. Let me just do a quick introduction of TFA in case the Tropical Forest Alliance is a multi-stakeholder platform. We are basically our aim is to address commodity-driven deforestation, and we do this by creating space for different stakeholders to discuss and come up with solutions together, including companies, NGOs, and governments. And we work helping companies a lot. So we work a lot with companies, but the past 3 years we've also started developing more engagement with the finance sectors as well for the past 3 years. Sorry, Matthew, you can go to the slide. The past 15 months, we have been collaborating with different stakeholders. We have been collaborating with FACS and CDP to develop this study about why and how downstream and midstream companies have been engaging at landscape scale. And we did it in 5 commodities: cocoa, palm oil that Matthew showed here, but also pulp and paper, beef and soy, and also how landscape scale action can contribute to climate and nature goals. And as you can see here, this is like just a snapshot on why companies are engaging for these two commodities and why we're looking at it at this specific commodity one at a time. Is because from our experiences with working with companies, we see them as being one, not homogeneous. Like when you say companies, there's like a really wide range of them, and the engagement at landscape interesting scale, so beyond value chain as it's discussed here. It's really depends also on what kind of production models that they use and what kind of problems they have here. But what we can see here from cocoa and palm oil is it's clear that the main thing is really to comply with their own their own sustainability commitments, and that they're also in palm oil, for example. There's also this important to highlight the opportunities to engage local governments, and there's also like particularly for cocoa and palm oil this aspect of smallholder inclusion, considering the production model, where palm oil is more than 40% is produced by smallholders, and cocoa is even like more than 90% is produced by smallholders, and smallholders at like 2 or 2 to 6 hectares. If you go to the next slide, please, Matthew. When we're working with the POFORS and CDP, one thing that we see is really like the number of companies. Companies' interest in landscape interesting approaches are increasing. Definitely, like you can see from the numbers that are disclosing to CDP, it jumped from 47 to 192 in 2022. Within 1 year, it jumped four times, and then it also increased again to 135 in 2023. And then by 2024, 2025, we are expecting to be even close to 400. And this is because companies are responding to CDP's question on whether they are planning on taking landscape scale action. Jade, thanks for the question. What do we define? How do we define landscape and jurisdictional initiatives? So when we do this study, we work with CDP, and CDP has like basically 4 criteria for landscape and jurisdictional initiative: that you're doing it at scale, at landscape and jurisdictional scale, that there's multi-stakeholder collaboration and multi-stakeholders, so different stakeholders working together. There's collaboration that's reflected in a shared action and shared targets, actually shared goals, and then shared action. And then last, that you have monitoring, recognizing in a lot of places sometimes this monitoring part is the weakest, sometimes comes a bit later, right? So when companies report to CDP, what they do is that they look at the initiatives that the companies submit, and then they see whether these meet these partially or completely or not at all, right? So that's the definition we use. And then we took company submissions to CDP, but we also did desktop review and interviews. We interviewed more than 100 companies and implementers and also other expert organizations. And these are what we found, right? We found in total more than 110 downstream and midstream companies investing in production landscapes of these 5 commodities, even though most of them don't have operations in these production landscapes. I think the only exception is for pulp and paper, because in pulp and paper, you have a lot of integrated companies that are processors, so midstream in some ways, but also they have producers. And what you see here is also in palm oil and cocoa, it's clear there's a lot of companies and a lot of landscape initiatives, and that really links to the problem around this smallholder inclusion and also deforestation. We think that that's really relates on why companies decide to engage at this scale. We also see, for example, in beef and soy, there's also less visibility, less traceability, and so that also affects why companies engage at this scale and realizing they need to work with other stakeholders because of the challenges. And we go to the next slide, please, and it's the last slide for me. and this is the one thing that I think will be really useful for this conversation. I think a lot of what was already discussed by Matthew and the UNDP team before, but we are just presenting this into these 5 business case for downstream and midstream companies. And I think the main thing to highlight here is that this is really commodity specific, and is also very much linked with the volume that the companies source. When they source small volume, they may feel that they have little leverage in influencing what change can happen on the ground, and so they must still engage in landscape and jurisdictional approaches. There are lots of companies that actually only source a small amount, but they see it as an opportunity to learn more about what's happening on the ground. What Jade also mentioned, right? What is happening on the ground and how can you create change? And then that working together, you can have bigger change. So this collective impacts. And that also links to reputational benefits. When you support action on the ground, there is stories that you can bring from the ground, and I think that's actually really useful when companies bring these stories from the ground. And there's also more and more recognition about landscape scale action in the reporting frameworks. CDP, Forest 500, WWF, Palm Oil Scorecard actually all have included landscape and jurisdictional engagement as a positive point for companies to engage. But then if you take a look at the middle to the right side, when you source even more commodity and you source them from areas that are highly fragmented or that's produced by a lot of smallholders, there is this question about regulatory compliance and whether you can do regulatory compliance by focus only with working with companies or by also bringing smallholders. And a lot of companies actually really want to bring smallholders into the sustainable supply chain. Engaging with smallholders of 2 to 6 hectares, very difficult to do if you do it one by one. And so engaging at landscape and jurisdictional scale is seen as the way to do compliance and meet their sustainability commitments in a way that is just and inclusive. If you look at the 4th pillar, the 4th column here, is like when you source even more commodities, and the commodities are produced by smallholders, there is no other way that you have to engage at landscape and jurisdictional scale if you want to secure your supply chain. And the last and emerging business case for companies, and it's like really still a lot of question marks, is whether and how action beyond supply chain can actually help companies to meet their global targets related to climate, nature, regenerative agriculture. There is realization already for a long time that you cannot address deforestation by working only on your supply chain. But if you look at in climate, for example, it's not really reflected in the SBTi guidance for companies to reduce their scope 3. However, if we see the science-based target networks nature targets on land targets, landscape engagement is already included as part of what should be a target for companies. And so, but on these global targets that require numbers, then there's also a question about how can companies claim this individually, right? Because engagement with a lot of stakeholders, working with a lot of stakeholders, achieving an outcome, how can companies claim parts of their outcome to meet these global targets? And I think finally what I want to say here, from the more than 110 companies that we identified have engaged in downstream and midstream companies that have engaged in landscape and jurisdictional scale, only about 70 of them only engaged in one initiative, right? So that I think it shows that they're only at the beginning, but there's a lot of potential for companies to increase investment in landscape scale action if we can show them the benefits in ways that's also like quantified and can be and credible, I guess. So I guess it's sort of like we hope that through this study we can build more business case for companies and to engage really in the production landscapes that allow commodity production that they source to be produced in the first place. I'll leave the link to the report and also to the Jurisdictional Action Network, this network of 2,200 proponents that we help manage on landscape and jurisdictional approaches, in the chat. And if you have any questions, feel free. And I'll also leave my email address if you're interested. I know that we're short of time.
Great, thank you. Yep, thank you, Leonie. Great insights. I think we have a question for you from Devaya at WBCSD. It's in the chat. Is there any evidence yet that deforestation or natural ecosystem conversion rates are reducing with the increasing number of companies joining landscape initiatives?
That's a great question, Devaya. I think one of the big challenge of landscape and jurisdictional approaches is the time span, right? Because if you have to bring the stakeholders to come together and agree on shared goals and then work together, of course it takes time. But I think we shouldn't shy away just because of time. Like it's a we have to take action now rather than later. But I think like in some commodities, in some initiatives, for example, in palm oil that has been going on for longer, we start to see like numbers. I think Aceh Tamiang district in Aceh in Indonesia, they have this monitoring system helped developed by WRI as well, with working with IDH and local stakeholders there. So it starts to come out, but I think that's one of the biggest problem is that this lack of outcome at landscape and jurisdictional scale, and that has to do with time, but also has to do with resources, right? Because even though it's landscape and jurisdictional scale, it's still big, and so to create change that way, it takes time, but hopefully it will be sustained. So then I think there's still value in investing there.
Leon, I have a question, and perhaps in your research and interviews, what is the how are the reporting initiatives, SBTI, accountability framework, CDP, etc. Is there a move to support more guidance for companies on being able to report against their targets through landscape initiatives, so that they have incentive through the reporting structure that they're all heavily using to actually be able to get credit basically for these initiatives?
Definitely. So CDP is one of the leaders, right? So CDP has included that question on landscape and jurisdictional approaches since 2020, I think 2020. And like I said, in course 500 landscape and jurisdictional engagement is added as one question for additional points in WWF Palm Oil scorecard also. But that's sort of like from the reporting frameworks, right? And it's sort of like those so far can be not quantifiable. So it's sort of like this company saying that we have engaged. There is much less requirement about how much, etc., or like what's the proof or that you create change. But there are numerous a lot of organizations are trying also to figure out the problems around claims, so that companies can make, there's more guidance on claims, on what companies can or should not say, what kind of information, etc. ISEAL is leading on that. They're convening a lot of organizations. I can also put a link to the some of the guidance that ISEAL has produced, convening like about 18 organizations working in this space. And then, but I think there's this other frameworks like SBTI and SBTN and other global frameworks. And I think the more recognition that landscape scale action gets, each recognition will build another layer of a business case for companies. And it's sort of like different companies will respond to different layers. And I think we just have to keep on building those layers so that companies see more value in engaging at landscape scale. Landscape projects are integrated within current GHG protocol and removal guidance. The last draft from GHG protocol, which was out end last year on land sector and removal, the last draft, and it was still a draft, it didn't recognize action beyond the supply chain, right? But there's a lot of inputs from a lot of organizations about this as well. again, recognizing that to address deforestation, you need to address supply chain action beyond supply chain as well. So I don't know the updates of when the final guidance will come out, but what I can put here also, Jade, is a link to consolidated feedback precisely on how landscape scale action can and should count against within company accounting. I can share also in the link. Sorry, in the chat.
Thank you, Leonie.
Great, thank you. So in the interest of time, we are in the kind of discussion phase, but we wanted to provide a few minutes for individual reflection before we continue our plenary discussion. Greta is sharing a link to a Google Doc, which everybody hopefully can access. I don't know if you wanted to share the screen, Greta, with that as well. And then we're just going to take a few minutes for anybody to post comments, questions in there, and then we will continue the chat in the group, in the larger group. And feel free, anybody who has questions, comments, to jump in now as well. So the Google Doc you can see on the screen, and you can put in anything in writing there, and we will bring it up for discussion. So we'll take a few minutes, but the floor is also open. All right, in the interest of time, as people are still typing into the doc, just offering this floor to anybody who has any thoughts, comments on the information presented, the discussions you've had in breakouts. Feel free to jump in. I may call on a couple people that I recognize, so. I see Stepan from Bayer. Are you there, Stepan?
Hello, Matthew. Yes, I am there.
How are you? Do you have any thoughts, reflections on today? and any public-private collaboration you guys are working on?
Yes, thank you for asking. I think a big hurdle is, in a way, I think both sides need to really try to understand each other's needs. And I think there's a tendency sometimes to not respect each other's needs, and I think that is a problem. I think what is really needed is an attitude that, a strong willingness from all participants to really make it work and to accept that. And I know it sounds a little bit like preaching, but I think it's reality. I think we simply, everyone must accept there are organizational needs that need to be respected, but there are also big strengths that can be leveraged. And I don't think that in really trying to make that happen and working out and fit together, leverage each other's strengths in a long-term vision with a clear commitment and clear rules. I think that takes a lot of time and effort to do that, and I think it's absolutely worth to do that. And I would propose that this kind of attitude should be applied a little bit more often.
Very good suggestion and advice, I think, for all of us engaging in these processes.
I think it's interesting looking at what you're all writing. It'd be very valuable for us to also hear about what materials you think will be helpful. So I'm reading a lot of interest, a lot of agreement with what we've discussed today. Many of you are saying that, yes, we can see how this will be helpful. We can see the challenges. So apart from the slide decks, which of course we are going to be sharing, is there anything specific that you would like to see? I also refer you to the emails that you received before the webinar today that had the case studies. So they're available also on our website and in the bigger toolkit. There's many case studies that were developed to give concrete examples of how collaboration can go beyond value chains. So have a look at those as well, but it would be great to hear what else you think would be helpful. So I see some of you now noting that, which will be great. I would also encourage you, once you've finished writing your thoughts, please take a minute to go up and read colleagues. What has everybody else written down? What are some of the thoughts that are coming out? Because that will help prompt maybe more thinking for you. So we'll just give you another few minutes to go over so you can get a chance to read what other people have written, and then feel free to go back to your comments and add anything that's gone there. I'm already, Matthew, shall I share some thoughts? Reading through the documents and what people have put in. I'm sort of seeing a few threads appearing. Would that be helpful?
Yes, please. I'm not seeing the doc right now, so go ahead.
Or should we wait a few minutes?
Up to you. If you see,
Oh, I can't hear you, Matthew.
up to you. Yeah,
We've lost you.
I'm here. You don't
I
hear
can
me?
hear you, Matthew. I can hear you.
No?
I can hear you, Matthew. I think.
I can hear you.
Okay.
Maybe,
So maybe
is it me?
I can also hear you, Leonie.
Yeah, Christina, I think the issue might be coming from your connection.
I can
I
also
see.
hear you.
Oh, go ahead. Or oh, yes.
All right, I can hear now. Sorry, it was me. Sorry, Matthew.
Okay, no worries. I see two colleagues here from WPCSD, Devaya and Ricidieri. I'm not sure how to pronounce your name. I don't know if the WPCSD, I know you guys are involved in Fuller and also working on various landscape deep dives. If you had any thoughts to share, please let us know, or please share with the group.
Sure, thanks. Thank you, Matthew. I'm wondering I think perhaps Riccieri is involved with our more on the ground collaboration with the soy value chain in Brazil. And I'm thinking, Riccieri, if you wanted to speak to some of the connections being made between our soy value chain work and the Soft Commodities Forum, including connections to the Brazil Fuller Country Project.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Devaya, and thank you for the NDP team for calling us in. So as Devaya mentioned, WBCSD is involved in various layers of the corporate and pre-competitive level collaboration, including at the landscape scale. Particularly on the project that I'm representing today, the Soft Commodities Forum, we are with an initiative called the Farmer First Cluster. So with 6 leading agri-traders working at the pre-competitive level in the Brazilian Cerrado, looking to foster deforestation and conversion-free soy supply chains. And I think that regarding the collaboration with between private sector and the public sector, indeed, as Devaya mentioned, we are now looking with the World Bank and the Fuller project at their Vertentes project. So how the Brazilian Fuller Impact Project in Brazil overlaps with other private initiatives at the landscape level, and looking how those can be leveraged both from the perspectives of farmer engagement, but as well as the complementarity of the solutions, going from technical assistance to restoration to compensation payments for surplus legal reserve, integrated farming to regenerative agriculture and others. So I think that it's still the first phase of the first year of the program, but soon we're going to hopefully have many other learnings to share. And thank you very much for the space here and for all the presentations. That was a very enriching and enlightening webinar. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Richard. And I can just add another piece of work we're involved with is under the rice value chain. We're involved more in another region of the world, in the Southeast Asia and South Asia region. It's a bit more of a preliminary work in terms of doing some feasibility analysis to set up blended finance facilities in 3 countries in the Southeast Asia region. This is involving some collaboration with IFC, as well as, so essentially, I think blended finance was talked about earlier in this session. And so it's about putting in place some of the financial infrastructure that will enable 3 blended finance facilities to be set up in 3 countries that will enable public sector and private sector funding to be leveraged towards more resilient rice landscapes in the region. That's a bit earlier stage than the soy value chain, so we're not quite at the landscape level there, but it's more country level partnerships first, and then subsequently it'll zoom into priority impact landscapes. Thank you, Matthew. Back to you.
Great, thanks, Devaya. And actually, on that note, we will be convening a third workshop focused on the Asia Pacific time zones, but in particular because the focus under many of the fuller country projects in the Asia region is rice. And I know Stefan is also engaged in that work, so perhaps we can convene to discuss. Maybe you guys can present some of the planned work that you're doing on the rice side for a workshop early next year. So stay tuned.
Sure, thank you. We'd be very interested. Thanks.
Well, I'll offer, since we didn't take a break, we can end a few minutes early, but I wanted to give the floor to any final thoughts, questions, comments from anybody.
I just wanted to jump in and say that sort of reading everybody's comments, one thing that stands out for me is that many of your comments refer to quality of collaboration as well. So throughout today, we've discussed about coming together, why we need to collaborate between private and public sectors more effectively, more deeply, and across. But quite a few of you wrote around the different language that public and private sector speak, the lack of trust that still exists. So these softer elements of collaboration shouldn't be forgotten. How can we support these different stakeholders to come together in a constructive way where we can help them speak the same language or at least understand each other? And interestingly, a few of you have noted something like the EUDR is a common framework. I know it's not the language, but it's a common framework that everybody will have to work with and understand. So potentially using those as entry points to get people around the table to achieve a common understanding and pathway to help deliver on that is good. But I thought it was an interesting point, that reflection on quality as well as the sort of coming together, but some common threads coming in the comments that have come in the documents. The other one I wanted to mention is, do have a look at the resources that are available. I think, Jade, you sort of shared, really being clear on what is and isn't a landscape approach would be interesting. We'd love to keep hearing from you once you've had a chance to look at all the materials. What else would be helpful for your audience and when you're trying to instill greater collaboration? So thank you for those points.
Great, thanks, Christina. And to everybody who's been putting good points into the Google Doc. A reminder, this is only day 1 of 2, so we do hope that all of you will return tomorrow. Tomorrow we will be getting into a little bit more details on the how. So today was kind of the why, why is collaboration important, what is collaboration, and tomorrow gets into a little bit more of how. So companies of different sizes, different parts of the value chain, different parts of the organization within a company, different governmental scales. So how does that look like in practice? And tomorrow we'll have a presentation from our colleague from UNEP, Lara, in addition to her colleague who's based in Brazil, presenting on some work in, I think, in Brazil. So with that, I think since we didn't have a break, we can give everybody 5 minutes back. I don't know if there's any final. I see something in the chat. Oh no, okay. But yeah, I think we can say goodbye for today, and I hope to see everybody tomorrow. Thanks again.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Bye.